Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sarah.
Here we are again for another discussion of The Girls Who Went Away by Anne Fessler. We are on chapter 4, Discovery and Shame.
Wow,
So it's
right?
all
It's
about the women finding out
feel
that
goods.
they're pregnant and then the shame that follows,
Yeah.
of course.
Here's a little quote from Gloria at the beginning. I'll start midway through. Don't come home was basically what her dad said. And my mom would not buck my dad. At that time, he was a sheriff. He would be up for re-election and did not want a daughter like me around. It was fine while I was class valedictorian in the Shining Star, but not while I was pregnant. No,
Nope. For
that's
single
interesting.
girls who
Yep.
became pregnant during these decades, the most common solution was a hasty trip to the altar and the claim that the baby's birth was premature.
Yeah, there was one girl, Maureen, she said, you could always get married to give the baby a name and then get divorced afterwards. That's what was done. That's what many, many girls did. I mean, that's how important it was not to be a single mom.
Yeah,
Or it was interesting this part because she gets into so many of the young women's stories. They all have different varying stories, but I didn't think so much about the women who were not wanting to get married and people were trying to force them to get married. That's a whole nother
right.
type of force, right? Like into abusive things and stuff sometimes, or just bad situations. It's more
Or
important to
super
marry
young
that
and
guy than
right.
like to be with
Um,
this miserable person.
and then of course it wasn't the men didn't have any
No.
responsibility. They were me. I mean, there were some though. She cited some
Yeah.
cases, but meanwhile,
Yes.
the young men who had fathered these children largely escaped social condemnation. We
Yes.
we know this. We've discussed
Yeah.
this before, but they really didn't. It was all put on the women. It was their fault for coercing the men. I mean,
Yeah.
this
Coercing.
was the general thought. Like, well, it's your fault because he wouldn't have been attracted to you had you not been you,
Yeah.
or whatever,
Right.
whatever
Exactly.
it may
Because of
be.
who you are is why this happened.
Right.
Ugh.
There were though, yeah, and, tens of thousands of girls were asked to drop out of sight while their sexual partners who had been so eager to couple escaped recrimination.
Hmm.
There were though, and they cite a couple of men who did have issues, right? So
Yes.
one woman, Lorinda, says, "Last summer I heard from my son's father, and he had had a terrible life, spiraling downward from this experience. He ended up cutting himself off from his entire family. He felt like he was a screw up and couldn't do anything right. He ended up in Vietnam, and he's one of those people who were adversely affected by it. That set the tone for his whole life."
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's young men who are very compassionate or care, wonder what happened to the baby, cared about the woman, weren't allowed to be together. Like look at American Baby, Margaret and her
Hmm.
husband. Like it affects people.
And
Not,
also, not to
yeah,
paint a sweeping butt brush from the men who didn't feel that
right,
way, right? It was a
right.
societal norm. Like
It was.
there wasn't a lot of reflection going on
No,
about this stuff in that period. So it isn't to say
no.
that all of them didn't feel bad, but
I thought about my birth father because he knew my mother. They were close. Someone else he was with was pregnant. And he kind of was like, I don't know what happened. And he was worried, but he also was young. It was also not really his job to find that out once you know what I mean? It was a weird time in
hmm
society. I mean, and some of these men were very young, by the way.
And here's one that somebody was talking about Connie talking about
Oh,
she'd
yeah.
lived in small town North Dakota. They'd been dating. He said he
Mhm.
went through 2 years of pure hell. He started drinking very heavily and did things during those 2 years that he won't even talk about. He went through a period of extreme rage. He would not accept money from his parents or go visit them because he was so angry. He
Mm,
said at the time that she was his whole life and that had been taken from him. He didn't know how he was going to go on. I mean, just
that's heartbreaking. Yeah.
so much sadness.
All of this is so much sadness. It's funny because she had this one part where the author, here's what she says. Well, now I lost it. Oh, for every woman I interviewed, even those whose parents showed them a great deal of compassion, the news of their daughter's pregnancy was a wrenching shock. Many girls' parents were overtly disgusted or infuriated with them. Some of the families made demands, drawing the drapes they had to hide inside, if they didn't go off. The girls were made to feel that they were shamed, and not just shamed, ruin their entire family.
Right.
That's an interesting concept to me, because that's the kind of shame. It's not just this thing with the baby and what losing the baby. It's really like, you've made us look so bad. And I feel like adoptees kind of share this shame sometimes in a weird way. I don't know. It had
I
me
think
thinking.
so. I think it's
Yeah.
that's generational trauma passed down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, they were asked to lie and, so they're set up in this, it's just set up for nothing but good, that nothing good.
Yeah.
And still then, the very last sentence of the chapter, they had yet to learn about the emotional impact of relinquishing their child, a child who was not yet real to them.
Mm. That's stage 2 of horribleness that they have to go
Yeah.
through.
Yeah,
And we hear about this a lot. I'm glad we're reading this. It's hard stuff,
it
but
is.
I'm glad we're tackling it. It's giving me a whole, like, we knew some of this, and we've been doing this 3.5 years, but probably for you too, it's giving me another level of insight into the brain of what our mothers went through and what other
Hmm.
people we've met, other birth mothers have gone through. Yeah. So now next week we do Marge.
Marge and Yvonne.
Marge and Yvonne.
Yep. Yeah. So, great guest coming on. She's got a really
Yes.
incredible story. So, a
A little bit different.
little bit
Yeah.
different. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. See you in a minute.
See you in a minute.